What's up, everybody? My name is Joe Brown, and this is Heresy Financial. At this point, I'm sure you've heard dozens of times from many different people that money velocity is a vital component to inflation, to the point where if money velocity is not actively accelerating, you cannot have inflation. So in this video, we are going to look at number one, what precisely is money velocity, and then we're going to go full on Adam Savage and bust some myths about money velocity to see 3 different reasons why it has no impact on inflation. Ready? Let's dive in. So what exactly is money velocity? Basically, the velocity of money is a measure of the number of times in which a unit of currency is used to purchase or sell in the measured period of time. You're basically trying to measure how fast money is circulating throughout an economy. Usually, it is expressed as a formula, and this formula is going to be as follows. The velocity of money equals the price level, the average general level of prices, multiplied by the aggregate value of all of the transactions that occur during a time frame divided by the total amount of money that is in circulation on average in the economy. Now, this formula would suggest that if you get a decline in the velocity of money, you must also have a decline in inflation. But this is one of those circumstances where I always like to point out what Yogi Berra pointed out, that in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is. Let's just look at what the long-term correlation is between velocity and inflation, because guess what? This data exists. Take a look at this chart where we can see the orange line, which is the 5-year CPI growth, and the blue line, which is money velocity. Do you notice any correlation here? If there's any correlation to be made, it would be a slightly inverse correlation where CPI growth over time generally moves a little bit higher and broad money velocity generally moves lower and lower. Now, this isn't a short-term time sample here. This chart goes back to 1875. And while we see brief momentary periods where spikes in velocity or sudden drastic drops in velocity might correspond to a similar spike or drop in the inflation rate, you see a far larger amount of time where that relationship is inverse, meaning that overall it's statistically insignificant. Said another way, whether money velocity increases or decreases, there is no historical evidence to suggest that money velocity significantly influences the inflation rate. And just in case looking at 150 years worth of economic history is too much for you, let's dial in and zoom in at the recent history since the late 90s. As you can see here, the velocity of money has basically done nothing since the 90s but drop. Meanwhile, over the same time frame, the general level of prices has done nothing but increase. And even though over just the last 6 months to a year, we've seen another sharp drop in the velocity of money, we've seen a corresponding historically sharp rise in inflation during the same time. So whether you look long term and see that there's no statistical significance to the correlation, whether positive or inverse, between inflation and money velocity, or you look at the most short-term timeframes possible and see velocity dropping and inflation spiking, it seems pretty clear at this point. But just in case looking at a long time frame of history isn't enough, that's okay, because we can also just use a little bit of logic here. I've used this example many times and it's not my own. I saw George Gammon use it the first time. But let's do a little thought experiment here. Let's say you and I are the only 2 actors in an economy. In year 1, I sell you 10 loaves of bread for $10 a piece. The economy that year, $100 changed hands, right? $100 went from you to me. Price of bread was $10 a loaf. Yeah, it's expensive, but it's nice bread. Next year, though, I raise my prices. Now, instead of charging $10 per loaf, I'm charging $20 per loaf. You come back to me, you purchase, not 10, 5 loaves of bread. What's 5 times 20? It's 100. So how much money changed hands this year? $100. How much money changed hands last year? $100. Money velocity, did it change? No. Did prices rise? They doubled. So at this point, it should be painfully obvious that you don't need a spike in money velocity to have a spike in inflation, because that's literally what's happening right now. Money velocity is going down, inflation is going up. Similarly, just because you get a spike in money velocity doesn't translate into a necessary spike in inflation. Money velocity is at an all-time low right now, and we could see it spike and take off from here, while at the same time experiencing either disinflation or maybe even deflation. And none of these outcomes would be historically unprecedented. Now, you know my view. I think we have a lot more inflation ahead of us, but that's a topic for a completely other time, has nothing to do with this. But it's time we start using historical data and, quite frankly, just logic, and stop paying any attention to velocity when we're discussing inflation or deflation. As always, thank you so much for watching. You guys are the best. Have a great day.